Gnanam paramam dheyam. Knowledge is supreme.
So, now if you attempt to understand the radius of the unreacted core as a function of time, that can actually be captured in this graph. So, suppose if this is the center of the particle and this is the outer rim of the particle, that is the initial radius of the unreacted core. And so, suppose if we look at the amount of species which is actually being consumed. So, if we plot Ca by Ca naught, so that actually reduces with position. So, if RT1 is the radius of the unreacted core, let us say at time T1, and if you assume that T1 is greater than 0, and at a later time further reaction would have occurred and the unreacted core would have shrunk a little more, and so this will be R of T2, this will be the profile with at time T2, where T2 is now greater than T1, and then at a much later time the profile would be so that is the concentration of species A as a function of position at various time. So, as we can see that as the reaction proceeds, the ash layer increases and therefore, the species A has to penetrate. So, therefore, species A actually penetrates into the ash layer, and as a function of time there will be more ash which is formed around the unreacted core, and therefore, we can see this is the concentration profile. So, now for all of the core to be consumed, so for all core to be consumed, which means that the unreacted solid actually goes to complete conversion, the time that it takes for complete conversion can be estimated as tau, which is equal to rho b, which is the density of the particle, multiplied by R naught into phi b divided by 6 dE into Ca naught. So, that is the time taken for complete conversion, that is all of the solid which is present in the original particle has now been consumed because of the reaction. So, using this expression we can find out that T by tau, which is the ratio of time taken to reach a certain radius because of this reaction, divided by the time taken for complete conversion, that is given by 1 minus 3 into R by R naught square plus 2 into R by R naught cube. So, suppose if we define conversion x b as before as 1 minus R by R naught the whole cube, then T by tau can be written as 1 minus 3 into 1 minus x b, which is the conversion of the solid which is present in the particle, plus 2 into 1 minus x b. So, this is the relationship between the time taken for the core to reach a certain location and the corresponding conversion, and the conversion is obviously a function of the size of the unreacted core. So, now the third process which may control the overall reaction is the actual reaction that is occurring in the surface of the unreacted core. So, suppose if we assume that it is reaction controlling. Now, what it means is that the reaction, the reactant species, now it diffuses through the gas film and it diffuses through the ash layer, and then it reaches the surface of the unreacted core. Now, if the reaction is the reaction that is occurring on the surface of the unreacted core with the solid is controlling the overall reaction, then it means that that is the slowest step, and the diffusion that is occurring through the gas film and also through the ash layer is actually fast. And so, which means that the reaction is ash layer and gas film resistances. So, this is unaffected by the ash layer and the gas film resistances, and also it suggests that the rate should be proportional to the surface area of the unreacted core. So, rate must be proportional to the surface area of the unreacted core. So, suppose if we depict the particle. So, here is a particle and the initial radius of the particle is r naught, and the ash layer and the unreacted core at any time t, let us say if that as r, and the ash layer which is actually present around is between r and r naught. Then if A in the fluid form and B in the solid form reacts to give products, then one could intuit what is going to be the concentration profile. So, because the reaction is the one which is controlling, the concentration of the species in the gas phase, in the gas film and also in the ash layer will be the concentration of the species in the bulk gas stream itself, because it's a very fast process and the reaction is the slow process. And so, we expect that the concentration of the species between r and r naught. So, if this is r naught will be equal to the concentration of the species in the gas phase, and this is the center of the core. And as soon as it reaches the surface, it will undergo reaction, and so there is no concentration in gradient inside the core. So, now we can write a mole balance in order to capture the change in the radius of the core as a function of time. So, suppose if N A is the number of moles of A which is actually reacting, then d N A by d T, which is the rate at which the number of moles of A is being consumed because of reaction. So, that should be equal to minus K prime into the area of the unreacted core multiplied by the corresponding gas phase concentration. So, that is basically the rate at which the reaction is actually occurring. So, now substituting the area of the surface, instantaneous area of the unreacted core, that is given by d N A by d T is given by minus K prime into 4 pi r square, where r is the radius of the unreacted core at any point in time multiplied by C A G. So, now N A, the number of moles of the species gas reactant, should be equal to the number of moles of the solid which is actually reactant based on stoichiometry, and so expressing that. So, N A equal to N B and N B equal to rho B into the volume of the unreacted core. So, now plugging in this expression, plugging in this relationship into the mole balance, we find that we can rewrite the mole balance as rho B into 4 pi r square into dr by dt, that is equal to minus K double prime into CAG. So, we can simplify this mole balance as dr by dt, that is equal to minus K prime, which is the intrinsic specific rate constant in CAG divided by the density of the unreacted core. So, now we can integrate this expression to find out the radius of the unreacted core as a function of time and other properties. So, that is given by r naught is the initial particle size, and suppose at any instant in time r is the size of the unreacted core, that is equal to K prime CAG divided by rho B integral between 0 to t dt. So, from here we can find that r minus r naught divided by rho B, and so we can rearrange this expression to find that the time at which a certain radius can be reached is given by rho B into r minus r naught divided by K double prime into CAG. Now, what is the time taken for reaching complete conversion? The complete conversion can be achieved when R is equal to 0. So, there should be a minus sign here. So, where the complete conversion can be achieved when R is 0. When R equal to 0, that is all of the core all of the solids which is present in the core has actually completely reacted. So, now with that we can find out what is the time required for complete conversion. So, if tau is the time required for complete conversion, that is given by rho b into R naught divided by k double prime into CAG. So, using this expression we can find out what is the fractional time required for reaching a particular radius, that is t by tau, that is given by 1 minus R by R naught, and that is equal to 1 minus xp to the power of 1 by 3. So, that is the relationship between the fractional time taken to reach a particular radius and the corresponding conversion if the system is reaction controlling. So, now we looked at 3 particular cases where we looked at what is the relationship between the fractional time taken with respect to conversion for if the system is diffusion controlling through the gas film, if it is diffusion controlling through the ash layer, or if it is reaction controlling, all of these for a case where the particle size does not change. That is when the reaction occurs, an ash layer is formed where the ash layer may contain inert solids or the products which may firmly bind to the layer where the solids have already reacted. Now, the next question is, we looked at 2 modes earlier, 2 modes of these kind of fluid solid non-catalytic reactions, where one case where the size of the particle remains same, the other case where the size actually starts shrinking. So, in the case of where the size starts shrinking, we can now look at what are the different rate controlling steps and what are the ways to find out what is the radius of the unreacted core as a function of time. So, now second mode is where the particle size changes. Now, if particle size changes, it immediately implies that there is no ash layer. We assume here that the density variation due to reaction is negligible, that is, the density of solid product and reactants are not very different. If the densities are different, the particle size can change even if ash layer is present. The number of steps that may control the overall conversion actually decreases from what we have seen in the first case where the particle sign does not change, because there is no ash layer that is present, and therefore, the diffusion through the ash layer can be ignored now. That is, the resistance for diffusion through ash layer does not exist for this particular case. So, suppose as before we assume that A species A, which is in the fluid phase stream, reacts with species B, which is in the solid phase, to form certain products. Now, the different steps that are actually involved in this case is basically diffusion of species A, that is, mass transfer of A from bulk to unreacted core or gas film diffusion, and then reaction at the solid surface, and then diffusion of the products back into the gas stream. So, there is no ash layer. So, therefore, there is no diffusion to the ash layer. So, what are all the different processes that may actually control the overall conversion? The first one would be film diffusion controlling. So, the gas film which is actually present around the core, which is actually undergoing this fluid solid non-catalytic reaction. So, that diffusion through that film might actually control the overall reaction, or it might be reaction controlling. So, let us start looking at the reaction controlling process. So, suppose if the overall reaction is conversion is controlled by the reaction, it is reaction controlling. Suppose if it is reaction controlling, then because if it is reaction controlling, it means that the reaction is the slowest step and all the other processes are correspondingly faster. So, therefore, the presence of the gas film around is actually irrelevant to the actual process that is occurring, because it is a fast process, and therefore, it is going to depend only on the unreacted core, which is present and which is participating in the reaction. So, it depends only on the unreacted core. And it is same as the reaction controlling, same as the system where the reaction is controlling the overall conversion in the case of the particles where the size of the particle was not changing. That is the previous mode that we had looked at. So, it is same as unchanging size. So, therefore, we can easily read that the fraction of time taken to reach a certain radius is simply given by 1 minus r by r naught, and that is given by 1 minus x p to the power of 1 by 3. Now, suppose if let us look at the next case, as if the overall conversion is actually controlled by the gas phase diffusion. So, if it is a gas film diffusion control. Suppose if the overall reaction is controlled by the diffusion through the gas film, then the film resistance, that is the resistance offered for transport of species from the bulk to the surface of the unreacted core, is actually controlled by many different factors, and some of the factors are what is the relative velocity between particle and the gas stream or the fluid stream. So, remember that the reaction is actually conducted in a reactor where the particles are now moving relative to that of the gas phase. So, therefore, the relative velocity plays an important role as to how much resistance that the gas film is actually offering to transport of the reactants from the bulk gas phase to the surface of the unreacted core. Another major factor is the size of the particle itself. Another factor on all other fluid properties, they may also affect the resistance that is offered by the gas film. So, there are several correlations which are available for estimating mass transport coefficient under the gas film diffusion control. So, remember that the resistance that is offered by the diffusion of the reactant species through the gas film is essentially captured in the mass transport coefficient Kg, just like what we have seen for the earlier mode, and there are several correlations which are available, and one correlation is by it is called the Froestling correlation, and that correlation is given by Kg diameter of the particle dp multiplied by the mole fraction of the species in the gas phase divided by the corresponding diffusivity, and that should be equal to 2 plus 0.6 into Schmidt number to the power of 1 by 3 and Reynolds number to the power of 1 by 2. So, Schmidt number is nothing but the ratio of kinematic viscosity to the corresponding diffusivity, effective diffusivity of that species, and the Reynolds number is essentially the dimensionless quantity that captures the corresponding fluid flow properties. So, now if the particle size is very small, so for small dp and small velocity u, the mass transport coefficient from if you actually do a little bit of algebra on the correlation, one can actually discern that the mass transport coefficient approximately scales as 1 over diameter of the particle. So, under these conditions, this the Stokes law can actually be applied in order to find out estimate the radius of the particle as a function of time when the unreacted core is undergoing a certain fluid solid non-catalytic reaction. Now, for large dp, large particle size and large velocities, then the mass transport coefficient scales as u to the power of half, that is the velocity, square root of velocity divided by the square root of particle. So, let us take the case of Stokes law regime. Let us take the case of Stokes regime. In Stokes regime, the mole balance dNb by dt, which is the rate of change of the solid species with respect to time, and that is equal to dNa by dt, and that is equal to rho b, which is the density of the solids, into d by dt of 4 by 3 pi r cube, where r is the radius of the unreacted core which is actually changing in size due to the reaction, and that should be equal to minus kg, which is the mass transport coefficient, multiplied by the surface area of the unreacted core surface, multiplied by the concentration of the reactant species in the bulk gas phase. So, from here we can write that rho b into dr by dt, that is equal to minus kg into Cag. But in the Stokes regime, the mass transport coefficient essentially is the ratio of the diffusivity divided by the radius of the particle, and so that is given by minus dE into Cag divided by r. So, now integrating this expression, we can find that integral r naught to r dr, that is equal to minus dE Cag divided by the density into integral 0 to t dt. So, this expression, this model actually provides a relationship between the radius of the particle as a function of time. So, now integrating, we can find out what is the time that is taken for reaching a certain radius. So, time t is given by rho b r naught square divided by 2 times Cag into the effective diffusivity to 1 minus r by r naught the whole square. So, that is the time taken by the particle to reach a certain radius r because of the heterogeneous gas solid reaction. So, now in order to achieve complete conversion means all of the solids present in the particle has actually been completely consumed, which means that r equal to 0 corresponds to complete conversion. So, under these conditions, we can find out that the time taken for complete conversion is given by rho b r naught square divided by 2 Cag into dE, which is the diffusivity of the particle, diffusivity of the species through the particle. And so, the fractional time that is taken to reach a certain radius of the unreacted core is essentially given by 1 minus r by r naught square, that is equal to 1 minus x b to the power of 2 by 3. So, this expression can be obtained simply by taking the ratio of these two expressions which are present here. So, now we can easily find out from this expression that the fractional time that is taken here is actually proportional to 1 minus conversion to the power of 2 by 3. Now, if we compare what is the corresponding expression in the case of the particles where the size of the particle does not change, then it is a completely different expression, and that is actually given by, in the case of constant size, if we compare, we will see that if the film diffusion is controlling, then in the case of constant size, the fractional time that is taken is equal to the conversion itself, and while for the varying size, t by tau is actually given by 1 minus x b to the power of 2 by 3. It is important to note that the conversion here is actually reflects the size of the unreacted core, and the conversion here actually reflects the size of the unreacted core in the varying size. So, therefore, clearly there is a big difference in the time that is taken for the particle to reach a certain size, where if the particle size is constant or the particle is actually shrinking because of the reaction. So, what we have seen in today's lecture is we have looked at how to capture the radius of the unreacted core as a function of time and other properties of the system when there is different processes that may be controlling the overall reaction. So, this we have done for two different cases, both the modes, that is the mode where the particle size does not change with respect when due to the heterogeneous reaction, and for the mode where the particle size actually shrinks because of the heterogeneous reaction between the fluid and the solid. Thank you.